Welcome back to Coffee with HR Pro, the podcast we will stir up with real talk with HR experts across Canada, unfiltered, insightful, and always with a hot cup of coffee in hand. I'm your host, Ashutosh. You can call me Ash, and this podcast is my personal initiative, independent of my work life, created with zero cost to our HR learners and professionals who want to grow, learn, and stay ahead of the curve. Grab a coffee and get comfortable. Let's dive in. Today's episode is called as Winning the Talent Game in 2025, Smart Hiring and Retention Strategies. And to help us unpack that, I'm thrilling to join by Miriam Simmonds. Miriam is one of my colleague. And Miriam, welcome to the Coffee with HR Pro. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Ash, for having me here today. I am doing excellent. It's finally stopped raining here on the East Coast this evening. Yeah, no, I'm excited to get into this conversation with you today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we jump into our today's topic, I will briefly give you an overview of Mariam's trajectory. So, Mariam is a seasoned talent acquisition and people and culture leader with over a decade of experience in recruiting for organizations across the Canada, from tech startup to national not-for-profit organization. She is currently at the people and culture manager at a sport, one of the sport industries, and also she runs MMS Talent Consulting. So if you want to reach out to her at the end of our conversation, she will give us her website and link. Her consulting work, she helps organization to create a organization design effectively, inclusive hiring strategies, and many more. Previously, she led a national recruitment effort at the MasterCard Foundation, developed internal mobility framework at GoG Games, and has filled hundreds of roles, technical professionals, and a leadership capacity at companies like Resolver, Viva Natural, and Drag International. She is a very passionate advocate for equitable hiring and a master of candidate experience. And she is someone who understands both art and science of recruiting. So this podcast is my personal passion project, completely separate from my work life. And also my goal is to make HR insights accessible to every learners and HR professional at a zero cost. Today I am joining with someone who insights I admire for a long time, Miriam Simmonds, a seasoned expert in talent acquisition and branding and inclusive hiring practices. So, welcome again, Miriam. We will start our podcast. So, this podcast is of five segments, and I will go through one by one. So, first of all, COVID-19 has given very hard time, and we can start from the COVID one. Since 2020, hiring has gone through massive change. And from your experience, what's the biggest shift you have seen in how companies hiring talent today?
Thank you so much, Ash. And that's a great question to get us started. So, in my experience, what I have seen in terms of different changes and things that have been impacting hiring since the pandemic, um, we are now in more of a candidate-driven market. So we still have, employer, it's very competitive with employers and, with the state of the economy that we're in right now. So landing a job is a very competitive process. But what I will say is that in previous years, candidates didn't have as much input into what the hiring process looked like, how employer branding, even words like employer branding, these are, things that are coming up in the last like 8 years because having a great candidate experience matters. So we are in more of a candidate driven market. at any given time when a candidate is in the hiring process, you just have to assume that they're also interviewing other places. So, what you often see when you get to the end of a hiring process, candidates declining offers, candidates letting you know that they have received an offer somewhere else, sometimes one or two offers. So employers really have to work hard to make sure that their employer value proposition is strong to attract the best candidates. So, in response to your question, we are in a more candidate-driven market right now, but the job market is still quite competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And after COVID hit over everyone's life, we know that top talent today expect like more flexibility work, remote work or hybrid models, even compressed work week. Have you seen employers successfully adapt to this kind of expectations from employee or candidate?
I think yes and no. I think that in the tech space, it has certainly been extremely competitive in terms of what employers are offering to candidates. So prior to the pandemic, we had, tech companies that had top of the line offices with snacks and foosball and pool, kegs in the office, unlimited wine and, and beverages that they could want. And, some of these organizations already had, remote working in place. Some organizations didn't. But, being the flashy employer was the trend prior to the pandemic. And, when the pandemic happened and remote and, hybrid work for the most part was how most of the organizations had to continue their businesses, it became really important to candidates, one, for their safety to work in organizations that were remote first, but then also organizations that were had a focus on work-life balance as well. So it wasn't just enough that you're able to work from home. I also need to be able to enjoy my life too. So I don't want to necessarily
Absolutely.
be working, beyond, let's say, my 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, where, in the past that might have been more acceptable for employers to expect that from their employees. So I would say that in a post-COVID world, we are still seeing organizations that do have to have work-life balance, a lot of unlimited paid time off, or extensive vacation packages, so that people do have that opportunity to not only work hard but they can also play hard, I guess, in a sense as well. So employers who have values that don't align also stand out as organizations where candidates don't want to work. So websites like Glassdoor, where people can write reviews about an organization, there's a lot of transparency as candidates are going through the hiring process. It's a lot harder for companies who don't have great values to hide that from candidates, because now candidates go into the job asking about, these negative reviews and what are they doing to make sure that employees are feeling more heard.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's mostly uh, employer need to focus on more intrinsic value as well as extrinsic value.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I have seen many talent acquisition folks are like they have a passive hiring process.
Mhm.
But yeah, let's talk about innovation. So, what's the one creative recruitment strategy that you have seen recently that actually works? It could be used by any organization or company. Can you give us an example of that one organization or company is using this innovative strategy?
That's a hard question, Ash. There's so many really great like strategies and tools. And, I will say in response to your question that, when you're looking at recruitment and talent acquisition, that it's a holistic approach. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And a lot of times to be able to attract top talent, you need to be doing more than just, one or two things to make sure that, your value proposition is being seen by the right candidates. But what I will say, in terms of a creative strategy that I think is practical for a lot of organizations to implement and doesn't cost a lot of money, is going the route of developing partnerships with universities. So let's say in technology, it can be very competitive and very challenging to hire like candidates because everybody's looking for people who are, let's say, software developers. But if you start developing relationships with different universities, different boot camp schools, and saying after, a candidate has completed the program, they can come and do a co-op term. I think a lot of universities do co-ops. So starting to build your pipeline through co-ops is a really cost-effective way for organizations to get their employer brand out and also start, having talent earlier without having to compete with other organizations. And then I would say that a more expensive technique,
Yes. Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
give you two, yeah. So a more expensive technique and one that I find works really well, in my career is headhunting, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. And, some people look at headhunting as a bit of a negative thing. But what it really does, if you have the in-house talent to do that, or if you have the funds to work with an agency or an external vendor, it allows you to search for a very targeted niche and specific skill in the market. And a lot of times you're able to accomplish it a little bit faster, depending. Sometimes the search can still take a significant amount of time due to the level. The more senior role is, the longer it does take to hire. But headhunting is a really great resource that not a lot of organizations have used. Now that talent acquisition has become a more strategic role within organizations, companies are hiring people who do have that experience, and a lot of that experience come from working as a consultant or working in an agency context. So when you are able to hire somebody with that experience, it gives you a leg up in the market just because dealing with passive candidates is quite different than dealing and interacting with candidates who are actively searching. But
Yeah.
those are the two that I would suggest,
Yeah.
co-ops and headhunting.
Co-ops and headhunting. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
these are a really very cost effective, whereas another one is totally opposite. Uh,
exactly. And there'll be a few more strategies that we'll talk a little bit more about, whether it's networking through
yes.
referrals as well. But in terms of, this question, I would say that for creative strategies, co-ops and working with vendors and agencies.
And how about opposite side, like if you are a candidate and you are looking for a job, because many of our viewers are as an HR professionals or just starting their career in HR and they are looking for a job. So what are one or maybe couple of strategies that they need to keep in mind? So what are those strategies that they can start and implement right away?
Yeah. The market right now being so competitive is very frustrating for candidates at the same time. And some of the advice that I would give, and I often give, I facilitated a workshop on Wednesday of this past week to participants in a boot camp that are looking to either transition or land more professional roles. And the advice that I gave them is number one, networking is one of the most important tools that an individual can add to their job search. Now, it can be a little bit challenging, it can be a little bit frustrating, but I do believe that networking is a really great tool. It could take maybe a month, 2, 3, or 4 months, for you to build a relationship with a professional. But when you do have that relationship built, when a role or an opportunity comes up, either maybe on their team or within their organization, you are top of mind. And, we both know that referrals are highly trusted within organizations and are typically looked at first, as long as the skill alignment is there. So networking is number one. Being persistent is very important during your job search. So, getting on the computer, applying for one job a week or, one job a day, That's probably not going to land you a job
Yeah, yeah.
unless you're very lucky.
Or unless you have a very high skill.
Exactly, exactly. But the key to landing a role in this market is really about volume. So, making sure that you're applying every day. We know the saying goes that applying for a job is a full-time job itself. So, really making sure that you're dedicating time to apply on the different job platforms, whether it's Indeed, LinkedIn, Workopolis, Greenhouse. And, one of the things that we discuss a lot now in our space is how to use AI. Use AI during your job search. There are so many job boards that list open roles that people don't often talk about. And you can ask ChatGPT for the job boards in your area, ask ChatGPT for the job boards in Canada, and it will give you a list and apply for the, start making profiles and start applying for jobs for the roles that they have listed. And sometimes, because not as many candidates are using some of the other job boards, you're more likely to get called for an opportunity within one of those organizations who have posted a role there. And the other piece of advice that I would give to somebody who is job searching is to really keep a positive attitude. Because
Yes.
when you land that interview, you don't want to go into the interview looking like what you've been through. The
Yeah.
job search is very tough. But, keeping things in your life that are positive, whether it's going for walks, keeping your mental health in a good state, eating healthy, spending time with friends, family, finding something that brings you joy is very important in the job search because once you do land that interview, now you're switching from hunting, job hunting, and now you have to make that mindset switch to presenting, the best version of yourself when you go for the interview.
Yeah, I think that one you touched upon, I would say, I would call as a secret sauce. That's a positive mental attitude is the main key. Wherever you go, it comes with you. Upon one of the key aspect of employee value proposition, and now we are going to our second segment, which is power of employer branding. So, my question is to you is. You have worked extensively on employer branding as in talent acquisition. So, for instance, at a MasterCard or any other your previous organizations, in your view, how powerful is branding when it comes to attracting A plus or like top-notch candidates?
It is so important, Ash. When we look at ourselves and there's the saying that you have one chance to make a good impression on somebody in the real world. It's the same with, employers as well. They have, one chance to make a good impression with a candidate as well. So depending on what, media and what platforms a candidate is interacting on during their job search, you don't know what they're going to engage with. So again, going back to that multi-pronged approach, as we have more generations that are entering the workforce, the same things that we did in the past are not working now. So social media is a huge, tool that candidates use as part of their job search. So having an Instagram, some companies have TikTok accounts that are showing, what a day in the life might look like in their organization, doing spotlight interviews with the employees who work within the organization so that a potential job seeker can go to the platform, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok, and have a glimpse of what a day in the life looks like. And, this can also be done on an employer's website under the careers page, having some pictures, maybe some videos, just to show a potential candidate what it looks like to work in their organization. And, when it comes to employer branding, how your organization is perceived is really important. So if you have an organization that isn't diverse, it's going to be difficult to attract diverse candidates. So I know diversity is, a topic that is going to come
Yes.
up. But it connects really well under employer branding because it goes back to the candidates doing extensive research on organizations before they're applying or as they're going through the job search. So making sure that you're active on the socials is really important because if you're not active, you're not going to be seen. Having job postings on different websites, like multiple different websites to make sure that you're getting, as much reach as you possibly can. Connecting with schools, even if you don't necessarily have a partnership with an organization for a co-op, you can still do and facilitate workshops at the different colleges, at the different universities. You can also invite students and do tours, structured and planned, and it doesn't have to be, often, but every once in a while, host an event in your organization and facilitate a tour. Because even if you don't have a role available at that time, when a job comes up, now people know who you are. And the hardest part about being competitive in this market is, you're going up against the tech companies, large and small, who have larger budgets. They can be paying for advertising online. So people are seeing their job advertisements constantly. But there are different ways for companies to get their name out without necessarily having to spend extensive dollars on online marketing for ads. Also hosting meetups within your organization. It's also a really great way for people to learn a little bit more about your existence and going and participating in career fairs, also partnering with, let's say, newcomer organizations or equity deserving groups. um, it's a really, when candidates see that organizations care about the community and the social impact, it makes them even more attractive as a potential employer. So being visible as an organization is really important, but employer branding, again, is something that's a little bit newer. So organizations are doing it more now, and I think it could probably even be a role in the future. I think one of your questions is, where do you see the future? Um, and I actually see, employer branding becoming a separate role within organizations that partners closely with marketing to help the organizations, have a strong presence in the market.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon uh, candidate experience is everything, I think. And so nowadays, Canadian laws are changing day by day and making more stricter and transparent for candidate as well as for compliance perspective. So what's the one mistake you think that recruiter need to stop making in 2025?
That is a great question. And it's always hard because everybody works differently, but I think, you mentioned this earlier in terms of candidate experience, that it is absolutely paramount in terms of attracting potential candidates. Even if they don't get hired, the last thing you want is a candidate telling everybody that they meet what a horrible experience they had going through the job process in your organization. So, treating people kindly is very important. Letting people know when they haven't advanced in the process. It seems simple, but so many organizations and so many recruiters don't do that. So a lot of times, candidates are being ghosted, ghosted in the market, and they're just left not knowing what has happened with their application. And, even when candidates have come in for an interview, depending on how many candidates you have seen, sending an email with a little bit of feedback helps, right? Because then it gives the candidate something that, okay, well, I didn't land this role. This is why. And then it gives them a little bit of closure. Now, sometimes depending on how many candidates are involved, that it does get a little bit trickier. But I do think that, the one of the best things that you can do for a candidate is to treat them how you would like to be treated. So most individuals want to be treated respectfully. So being able to give them information as they're going through the hiring process is really important so that they're not feeling Stress levels are high when you're applying for a job, but when you're informed and you know what's happening, it does help the process, and take away some of the stress as you're going through the interview process.
Yeah, and that's also apply to active candidates and passive candidates. And we know that passive candidates can be a gold. So, but sometimes they're hard to reach. So, how companies or organizations better tap into that talent pool of passive candidates?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more work sometimes than people realize when it comes to hiring. Sometimes people think, well, so many people are looking for a job. Why is it hard for you to hire? Why is it hard for you to fill this role? But the challenge is that every organization has specific skills and experiences that they're looking for. So you might have 500 applicants for a role or 200 applicants for a role, and you've gone through the screening process, and maybe you've shortlisted 10 people, and then after the phone screens you now have maybe one, two, three, or four people moving to the interview stage. So it's very important to make sure that, when we're dealing with passive candidates, that, you're transparent, let them know what the process is going to look like, let them know why, they would be a good candidate for the role. Flattery works. Flattery works. So if you reach out to a candidate on LinkedIn and you let them know, I'm reaching out to you because of your experience in this specific area, I believe that it would align with a business need, and
Yes.
just have a conversation, and just see if they have some interest and alignment there. I think that is the best way to reach out to passive candidates. Not, trying to sell anything, just it's about a conversation. Give them an opportunity to make that decision if there is alignment, with the role that you're recruiting for, and then make sure that you keep them informed as you're going through the process.
Yeah, that's true. And many times we need to hire a couple of from diverse background, and we are going through our third segment, which is diversity, purpose, and smart tech. So let's shift gear a bit and talk about DEI, tech, and innovative or innovation in hiring. Sometimes many organizations think that okay, DEI is just a checkbox, right? It's for compliance purpose, but DEI is not a checkbox. It need to be built into more hiring DNA. It need to be built into the hiring DNA. What talent acquisition team to do ensure they are hiring very inclusively, there no one left behind.
In like the political state that we're in right now, I think it's great that we're still having conversations around DEI and the importance of having diverse organizations. And, I think right off the bat, the most important thing is that most candidates want to work with diverse organizations. So it can already be a very negative thing when an organization says to the public that, DEI is not our focus anymore. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding, when it comes to conversations around DEI. And, DEI isn't about hiring candidates who are not qualified for the role or lowering the bar, for different candidates. I think in most cases, when we're looking at candidates that do come from a different background, the bar is often higher. The requirements are often a little bit, you know, a little bit harder for, those candidates, and, the candidates who are different are having to come in and having to build trust, with people who have, whatever biases or stereotypes or perceptions, and we all have them, that's part of being, part of going through the human experience. But when it comes to organizations who don't have a strong, belief system around DEI, it can be a big deterrent for candidates. One, for candidates who are part of equity deserving groups, they're not going to really be as interested in working for a team that is not diverse. And then for any allies, they might look at an organization and think, well, this organization doesn't share my values around diversity. I'm not interested, in working with an organization that is not diverse. And, as we've learned throughout our careers, diverse organizations do have, they according to the statistics, they have more, higher performing teams.
Yes.
So, it's advantageous to organizations to have diverse teams because you're bringing different thought, different experience, different problem solving abilities. So it can really be to an organization's benefit to be diverse. And how can they be more diverse? It takes a lot of work and it requires intentionality. Sometimes people do live in towns that aren't as diverse. I'm on the East Coast, and I think, in more recent years, the East Coast has gotten more diverse. But when I was growing up, it didn't look the way it does now. And it would be easy for organizations to say, well, we're not a diverse province, so we're not going to focus on diversity. But what you can do is kind of go to the drawing board and, implement some of the strategies that I mentioned. Make your organization welcome to women and newcomers, and other groups who are also equity, deserving groups. So anybody who is, two-spirited LGBTQIA plus, make your organization a safe place for people to want to work. And, whether you're going to schools, whether you're going to organizations, whether you're using recruiters and, other vendors as well to say, hey, we're struggling. You might have to hire a consultant who can, do an audit for your organization. And you could just be open and transparent and say, we're struggling in this area. Can you help us be more diverse? You can do things like revamping your job descriptions and postings, implementing a referral network, or a referral program that challenges people, to connect with more diverse organizations, start volunteering, and start building partnerships with people who are outside of your network. I think everything kind of goes back to challenging ourselves to stepping outside of our network because our networks are typically a reflection of ourselves. So, I can also have a network that isn't as diverse as it could be. So when I'm looking, for certain roles within certain organizations, I also have to challenge myself and say, Miriam, we could do better than this. Network, and I have to challenge myself and say, okay, well, where can I start finding more diverse candidates? And I think the last piece is really working on having your hiring managers on board as well. So giving them additional training, giving them additional support, helping them navigate the hiring process in a way that makes people who are different from them feel comfortable. Because it could be as simple as asking a person, oh, your name's different.
Yeah.
Very hard to pronounce. How do you pronounce your name? Or where are you from? Are you born and raised here? And there's different ways to learn
Yes.
about a candidate through the interview process, but there's ways to do that that doesn't make a person feel like, well, am I the first person who's different to be hired, within this organization? So, making sure that your hiring managers have good support is really important when it comes to having, DEI strategy and talent acquisition.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes I have seen many of recruiter who don't pronounce my name correctly. So I have to go by my first three letters, Ash, and they are good to go. And there is actually a Harvard Business Review paper written by How Diversity Can Bring Innovation. I will put into our description so our audience can see the different variety of research on diversity, how diversity can lead to innovation and innovative strategies. Regarding my next question, like nowadays, more job seekers, they want to work with a company who have the purpose or sense of purpose and belonging. How company can authentically showcase that during the recruiting process, they have a sense of purpose.
Yeah, I think that it goes back to showing gratitude, to the candidate for what they have to offer. Treating people as humans, anytime an organization is growing, it can start to feel like, okay, well, yeah, we're just, cogs in a big machine. But really, we're all individuals who are contributing, different knowledge, skills, and abilities and experiences. And like you've said, which leads to more innovation. So I think one thing that's, people within organizations can do is just to remember that everybody is a person and everybody is contributing um, a lot of experience to a new opportunity within a role. And, I think that goes a long way for a candidate when they know that they're feeling valued as they're going through the recruitment process.
Yeah.
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 go ahead.
I was just going to add that, once a new employee has been hired, not just, kind of throwing them into the role and saying, okay, now you're hired, here you go. Having a good onboarding process is really important. And including whether it's a support, organizations call these individuals different. It could be a peer mentor, it could be a buddy, but just somebody within the organization who can support them in the first few days, weeks, and months when they've joined the organization, so that that adds to that sense of belonging and that adds to that sense of, hey, we care that you've been brought onto our organization. Transitions can be really difficult. We want to give you as much support as we can. Here's, an individual outside of your team or within your team who you can go to and ask anything.
Yeah, and new hires are they're feeling very kind of a odd one out, and they're what the heck is going on, right? They are understanding the process. They are doing touch base with their team members and also customers. So very new experience for new hires. So definitely giving sense of purpose. And you mentioned about peering and mentorship or buddy system. That would be a great idea. But nowadays we have our good friend AI and automation, which which does predictive hiring in specifically in tech, is changing every day, everything. And do you think that these tools are helping us to hire better? And we introduce a new, or maybe we introduce a new risk for hiring? Because when I was reading uh, book on AI snack oil. So how AI companies are pitching their like elevator speech to HR, that okay, oh, we have a AI based hiring system, predictive system. They can predict candidate and the video.
Mhm.
And there are loopholes in the AI system as well. So what's your thought on this?
Yeah, I think that AI, I think technology, I think advancement, all those are fantastic. And, I think in the field of human resources, we've been a little bit slower to kind of get on board. But we use the tools in a number of different ways, whether it's like the HRIS systems, the human resource information systems, or the applicant tracking systems, or, the candidate tracking systems. So finding tools that make our work easier is really important. And I think that, some people have a fear of AI, but I believe that it's not possible to completely erase, the work that a human can do. And, in my work, I've had the opportunity to use tools that do help with candidate sourcing, but you still need a human because AI is still, biased. We still haven't taken the
Yes.
bias out of AI yet. So, having a second pair of eyes in the human form is really important. And sometimes AI it can't screen for, let's say, like personality, in a cover letter. If somebody has a very strong values alignment with an organization, but their skill and experience is a little bit outside of the box of what the employer is looking for, but they've written a very compelling cover letter, AI can't process that. So I've hired, candidates who've wowed me, at the first level, at the talent acquisition level, with a really strong, value proposition in their cover letter. And they have gone on to meet with the hiring managers and eventually landed the role. So those are candidates that AI would typically screen out because they don't meet all of the requirements, but it doesn't mean that they don't really meet all of
Really,
the
yeah.
requirements. So AI can't tell the difference between, skills and life experience, for example. Just going back to AI not being able to, it's still a little bit biased. I think it's, they're working hard to improve it, but it could still be a little bit biased. And, I think depending on the role that you're hiring for, it's very helpful. I think for roles that have very specific requirements, let's say maybe looking for an accountant and they have to have a CPA and 10 years of experience in a certain industry, having filters and AI tools that can screen out everybody who does not meet those requirements, that is very helpful. So AI can be a very great tool.
Yeah, and you mentioned about false negative high like by AI. So by mistakenly, even though candidate is qualified, but mistakenly reject during the recruitment process. So yes, AI has their own biases. Definitely, we need to uh,
Mhm.
work on how, or maybe work on how we can maximum utilize a power of or harness power of AI and
Mhm.
automation.
Yeah, yeah.
And during your trajectory, you have used many platforms and systems. Any favorite tool you would recommend for smarter and faster hiring process?
I think that most of the tools that I've used are fairly like industry standard. I've used Bamboo HR. I've used LinkedIn, for applicant tracking. I've also used Monster, as a tool for candidate sourcing. There's other tools like Lever that are also really good as well. And, there's tools that, depending on the size of your organization, would work well for you. So what I do suggest is that, start not ignoring the vendors because I think it's easy for us to say, oh, cold calling, I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to talk to them. But the more information that you have about the different tools will help you, have information about how you can support your organization. If you're with a large organization and they already have a tool, in place, maybe you're using SAP, maybe you're using Oracle, maybe you're using Lever, and that tool is existing, but maybe it's not meeting all the business needs. Have those conversations with some of the sales professionals or the customer success professionals to find out how your needs could be better served. Maybe you're not doing um, or having development conversations with the employees because it's not at the top of mind of hiring managers. But we know in terms of retention, having conversations with employees about the future is really important to them. So finding a platform or asking, the company of the platform that you're using, how else can we make this easier for hiring managers to do when it comes to developmental conversations? Maybe they have to build a piece, maybe they have to break the application to make it work for your organization. But something that I've learned, in my personal experience is that if you don't ask these organizations, you won't know what they're able to do. So feel free to have difficult conversations with them and say, we want to push your software to the limit. They want to keep the customers, so they're going to find ways to make it work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a customization for application and platforms and systems. So that's a hiring is a one piece of the puzzle. Now we have hired, onboarded, working on their work, like and the second piece is retaining great people is the next biggest challenge. So what are some key things organizations can do better to retain amazing talent they already have?
Yeah, when it comes to retention, I think that is the piece that sometimes is really hard for organizations. That's why candidates now are leaving a lot of roles if they don't feel happy within the organization. It's if you're very, if you have an in-demand skill, it's easy for you to get a job. And, as you're saying, as we're preparing to transition, we can look at the candidate experience almost like a dating, experience. It's like when you're, looking for a new person to date, you're in the market, you're presenting yourself a certain way, you're going on, coffee conversations and having coffee dates with people. And, when it gets to the stage where it's like, okay, yeah, we're interested in, making this a long-term partnership, then now the things that you're doing are a little bit different. So when it comes to employers, we have to make sure that our candidates feel, going back to what I was saying, that they matter, that they're being heard. So it's not about implementing everything that, if you're doing surveys in your organization, it's not about implementing everything that candidates are writing on the surveys or that employees are writing on the surveys, but it's showing your employees that we've heard what you have said about the work-life balance in the organization, or we've heard what you have said about the current benefits program that we have in the organization. And, we're not able to make adjustments to it now, but we have noted it as something that we're going to change in the future. So, making sure that your employees feel heard is very important. The next one is being transparent and honest with the employees that you're hiring. So if as a business you're looking to make changes, be transparent as much as you can without putting the business in jeopardy. If you are preparing to, go back into the office, don't leave it too late before you start telling, your employees that you're transitioning back to maybe a hybrid model after you've been working remotely for a significant amount of time. One, because there's legal ramifications to it,
Yes.
but also two, it does help, giving your employees adequate notice makes them feel like, okay, my organization cares for me. And, I think reminding our employees that there is life outside of work and that it's okay to have life outside of work, I think is one of the most important things. If people have, trips that they're planning for, want to spend time with family, if they have emergencies that they're planning for, if they have to take care of, animals, people, relatives, friends, grandparents, siblings, most people in life are going through something. So, making your employees feel that there is space for them to also have life outside of work is really important. So, if an employee needs to leave a little bit early to support somebody in their life, you know, don't make employees feel negative or feel bad for having to go. Maybe it's a self-care appointment that they're also going to. I think, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves is very important. If somebody has an appointment that's related to their care, making them feel that, yeah, your care is important, go ahead. Don't even think twice. If an employee is ill, letting them know that they have your full support is extremely important. Because what happens when they, now when they're on the other side of whatever they were going through, they remember that, my employer didn't look at me as, a stressor or as a negative thing, but they supported me through this process. I think that's a really important thing as we're looking at retention. Of course, being remote is always a great thing, depending on the individual. Some people only want to work for remote first companies, which
Yes.
I think is getting a little bit harder now. So, having a hybrid option, I think is the next best attractive thing. And then having, I think, really great benefits for employees to take advantage of as they're being employed within your organization. And, if there's an opportunity for the benefits to extend to like partners, spouses, and their family, that also does make it, more attractive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mhm.
kind of we touched upon earlier that employee value proposition is the main key feature of retaining our top talents and as well as also our top performers. So
Exactly.
uh, one of my question is what's underrated or overlooked strategies that help to keep our top performer engaged?
I love that question, Ash. I think an underrated thing is promoting from within. Giving people opportunities to learn and stretch themselves for the next role within the organization, whether it's lateral, maybe doing a short sabbatical on another team just to continue to build on the experience. But I think one of the most underrated things is promoting from within because we can look at our employees and think, they're not ready. There's nobody internally who can do this role. But most cases, that's not true. And if we're organizations who are planning, for the future all the time, then succession is always at the top of mind. So when somebody joins the team, having an understanding of, well, what other areas are you interested in? What other experience do you have? And then start finding ways that, that employee can build on their skills, maybe have like partner collaboration opportunities on certain projects so that when a role does become available, they're able to move into it. And, sometimes when you're interviewing with really great organizations, the hiring managers are thrilled to be able to say, the best thing that can happen to me is that I get replaced by somebody on my own team. That is always a huge compliment to a manager, or a senior leader when they're ready to advance, within their organization to another role. When somebody on their team has been prepped and ready, to take on a new role. And, I think the next best thing to promoting from within is supporting employees positively when you know that they want advancement, but it's not going to happen within the organization. Be transparent with them during the development conversations and say, you are a valued member of our team, but I know that, where your goals are, and that's not going to be possible, on my team or within this organization, but I want you to know that you have my full support. So when an employee knows that they have their manager's full support in their development, then they're open and honest and more transparent about how they're moving within the market. So when they are ready to start looking for a job, instead of doing it in secret, they've had the conversation with their manager. The manager can even be their reference for them because it's been open, and then it also helps the manager plan for the future as well. Instead of receiving the 2 weeks notice, and then now you're trying to backfill a role within 2 weeks. If you've developed these relationships with your employees and your team members, and they're open and transparent with you about their development plans and you support them, it makes for a better partnership where instead of searching in secrecy, you're, working together to help this individual find a new role.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. And sometimes employees can only open when they feel that they have a safe space or psychological safety.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will catching on them and they can't open their full potential. Okay,
Okay.
sounds good. We are in the segment five, is real wins and forward thinking. Uh, we have you have run several successful campaigns over the years. Can you share a specific hiring or a retention campaign that deliver outstanding results?
I guess one of the hiring campaigns that really stands out to me over the course of my career, because it incorporates, advocating for diverse candidates. And I think that as HR professionals and as talent acquisition professionals, we have to remember that we are the experienced consultants that are helping our hiring managers build their teams and have more successful and productive teams within the organization. And sometimes hiring managers can push back and say, no, that candidate's not suitable. But we have to trust our own knowledge and experience and be able to really work in partnership with the hiring managers and be able to tell them why, this candidate would be a good fit for the team. So, being, knowing and building good relationships with the candidates that you're working with is really important. And being able to advocate for them and their skills and experience to the hiring managers is really important. I was working with a large, firm downtown Toronto, and they were looking to grow their accounts receivable team. So they were looking for a few roles, and they screened out, a really great candidate and screened in a slightly more average candidate. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, well, why is this happening? And you can't just go to a client and say, well, you screened out a really great candidate. Why did you screen them out? But, that's the part about being able to be a consultant, is to get on, talk with the hiring managers or speak with the client and find out a little bit more about why they're saying no to certain candidates. And, even when we're hiring and working with hiring managers internally, finding out why the hiring manager is saying no to certain candidates is really important in helping to break down some of the biases and stereotypes that we have, because some of these candidates that we say no to actually end up being the star candidates, which is what happened in this case. Is, the candidate that they said no to actually went on to do very well within the organization. And, one of the candidates that they had initially said yes to stayed for a little bit and was actually, let go from her role. So I think, one of the most important things that we can do in our industry is continue to use our voices for positive change within the organizations and within the companies that we're supporting. I think that that is one of the best strategies that we can use, to make a difference within the organizations.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of our listener work at small companies with very tight budget. So, what's your advice for them on how to still attract A plus or top notch candidates without breaking their bank?
Yes, there's so many creative ways to do that. And, I love how much care that you have for all the different sized organizations. And, I think the first thing that a small or growing company can do is go back to the basics. Have a presence on social media. And it can be a little bit daunting and a little bit challenging if nobody in the organ, let's say you don't have a marketing team, you might not even have a full HR
Yes.
team. But there's different ways that you can start creating that digital footprint within your organization, and making sure that you have a post periodically, having a page on Glassdoor, having a page on LinkedIn, having a page on the Instagram. I would recommend those first as a minimum towards building that employer, to building that presence in the market. And another tool that I think is really important that probably not all organizations know how to use is being able to use LinkedIn Recruiter as a tool when it comes to hiring, because you might not always get the candidates that you would like through the application process if you're a smaller and more maybe unknown company in the market. But if you're able to send messages out to different candidates that have experience that aligns with what you're looking for, but you're doing it in a way, as we said earlier, that, it's about starting that conversation, is a really great tool. And, there's different levels of LinkedIn. So it doesn't have to be the full package. There could be a light version, just to give you an opportunity to get some in-mails out to different candidates. But, even if you're a growing organization or a smaller company, you have to remember that you still have a value as well, and that there are candidates who are using your product, who love your product, or whose values align with your organization, and finding those candidates in the market. It's okay if people say no to you as well as an employer. That's okay. And so, we also as employers sometimes just have to keep going. We've had opportunities where we've made offers to candidates and they've said no as well. And, sometimes no is the best thing that could happen for you because there's a candidate who's better aligned, for your organization. So, as a small organization, don't feel, pressured to just hire people. You want to hire people who share your organizational values because there's nothing worse than having, a negative person on the team or like a detractor on the team within your organization.
Yeah, and I think LinkedIn and Indeeds are a very powerful tool when
Mhm.
you are either searching a job or you are hiring as an employer. And nowadays, LinkedIn has a AI inbuilt, so you can write a cover letter and you can check whether you are fit for the job or not based on the resume. And
Mhm.
as I mentioned earlier, I was reading a book on AI snake oil, where AI companies pitching to HR about their AI-based hiring strategies.
Mhm.
So, do we have any work as an HR professional in near future, or where do you think talent acquisition is heading in next 5 years? And second question attached to the same question is what HR professional can do to prepare for the future.
Yes, we definitely still have work, Ash. I think we're going to be okay. The funny thing about talent acquisition is that, let's say even 10, 15 years ago, I started my career just over 12 years ago. It wasn't as popular. Honestly, I didn't even know what talent acquisition was when I started. And over the course of my career, I have seen, this area in human resources grow tremendously. And I'm excited to see it continue to grow so that talent acquisition is even more, of a business partner within the organizations. And, I think that what's next for HR, I think going back to employer branding, I think, starting to look at ourselves as, the faces of the organization is going to be the next step. And, being able to partner even closer with marketing. Over the course of my career, I've worked with really great marketing professionals. And I expect that, HR is going to continue to do that, but even more specifically, we're going to have roles that are dedicated to employer branding. And, I think talent acquisition as a function within HR is going to continue to grow into more of that business partner relationship. And yeah, and we still have a job.
We
I
still
think
have
we'll
the
be okay.
job. Thank you, Miriam. This was an incredible advice you gave today. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, insight, and energy with us today. I know listeners are taking notes and they are definitely walking away with some great ideas that can actually they implement and use in their practical life. But before we wrap up, where people can connect with you and or learn about your consulting work. So can you please share your a little bit about your consulting work?
Absolutely. And just kind of going back to your question about where is HR going to be, in a few years, in 5 years, in 10 years. The consulting space is a space that, some people thought was dying, but it's not because there's still organizations who need that support, whether it's on the hiring side, on the DEI side, on the culture and engagement side. There are people who can dedicate time that, sometimes organizations are not able to dedicate as they're going through their day-to-day work. So you can find me at mmstalentconsulting.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Miriam Simmonds, if you type that in. And you can also find me I am recently the founder of the Black HR Professionals here on the East Coast. And there is a national organization for that, actually, Black HR Professionals Canada as well. So there are a number of places, and I'm pretty active online as well. And if you need workshop support, I love facilitating workshops, and it's part of the work that I do through MMS Talent Consulting. And yes, I've built this consulting firm while, maintaining a full-time role. And, just to give a little bit of encouragement to, anybody out there who is looking for a job or is looking for a career pivot. Ash, as you mentioned earlier, that you and I have connected through the PMIR program. And I started this program after my role was impacted last year. And it can be very discouraging, at any level when your role is impacted. But what it really allowed me to do was ask myself what I wanted next in my career. And going to school is something that I had on my list. And, I've been able to check that off. And this program has been very enriching. And I've met, amazing people like you. And what also, happened as I went through the job process as well, though, is that it actually gave me more information as well. I learned more as I was going through the job process as well. So, I think that looking at every experience that life sends us positively, as we said earlier in the episode, that it's important to, maintain a positive attitude so that whatever opportunity is coming your way, you are prepared for that opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's incredible. Thank you to you, Miriam. You shared a lot of insights and energy with us today. So, and that's a wrap up on this episode of Coffee with HR Pro. If you like what you heard, be sure that you subscribe, share, and leave a comment. And please reach out to Mariam if you need any help on diversity, inclusion, or any kind of recruitment help. She is happy to help through her consulting, or you can reach out to her via LinkedIn. Remember, this podcast is all about keeping HR learning accessible, free of cost, uh, for anyone who want to keep learning and leveraging up their experiences and learning from others' experience. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Until next time, keep learning, stay caffeinated, and never stop growing. Thank you so much.